are some folks who I see Amar there, who has been part of that through the years, and I'm here because I love kind of sharing my experiences. I think there's a lot to be learned from storytelling, and yeah, excited to share.
And I am David Van Tonder. I'm from TD, as introduced. I head up a group of about 2,500 people in the quality engineering, release management, and a number of support functions for the technology part of TD. It's mostly in the Canadian bank. And I'm also involved in the Forever Proud ERG for Platforms and Technology. I'm the executive sponsor for it. So this topic is very near and dear to my heart, not just as a gay man, but as a member of TD and what TD stands for and how we think about diversity and inclusion. Been in the industry longer than I can remember, and I've been all over the industry. Started my career in South Africa in the film and television industry. I went to university for poli sci and communications. I'll talk about that a little bit in a bit. I say my day job is sales and marketing as a leader in the organization, so that came in really handy actually. Sort of stumbled into the technology business, like it was said in the previous session at the keynote. Nobody ever talked to me about technology as a career choice. I just sort of stumbled and it happened to be in the right place at the right time. Moved to Canada about 25 years ago. Went through a number of consulting. Worked in private industry, then in consulting. Made my way through consulting and through full-time employment, 4 of the 5 banks. And I will say the experience between each of those organizations have been, diametrically extreme ends to some extent. And one of them, I was totally out and proud. I moved to another one. I felt I had to go back in the closet because of the environment there. And I'm at TD now, and it's like out and proud, and this is it. Here I am. Take me or leave me. So yeah, excited to be here today and have a chat.
Great, thank you. And just 2,000 people, 2,500, 600 people. When we talk about people's skills and what people should be thinking about developing, what makes people stand out for you in terms of looking into that crowd of workers or colleagues and saying, "Oh, this person has potential for advancement in our company."
Sure. I mean, there's so many things. It really depends in some cases on the role and who you'd be kind of interacting with and kind of what needs to be brought to the table. But for me, when it comes to finding people like future people leaders, I look for folks typically who are empathetic. And I actually think I was kind of thinking about it yesterday of like, as queer people kind of trying to get into leadership roles, particularly in technology, that's such a superpower because I feel like, we've often been excluded. I don't want to generalize, but I think most of our experiences would kind of confirm that or feel excluded, whether intentionally or unintentionally. And I think we kind of have this like inherent kind of like empathetic muscle that we've built up through those experiences. I look for people who can kind of be a bit of a chameleon. I think people don't realize you can't just be one type of leader. I think depending on the type of person, like or the makeup of your group that you're leading, you have to kind of change and like um, not change maybe, but I think kind of tweak the way that you lead different people depending on their experiences and how they like to be managed. And ultimately, I look, I always say what makes a good people leader is like how would you want to be treated, you as an individual. And I think most people are just constantly looking for growth, right? People want to feel like they are supported in their career journey, whether that's into whether that's being kind of staying where you are and kind of continuing to excel in your role or having progressive roles where you're at. I think people just want to feel like you're invested in them, and so you look for people who kind of have that muscle, who spend time coaching and mentoring, and not just people who are directly like in their group. I think especially in technology, when I think about like of the 600 people at Loblaw Digital, like 500 sit in a sprint team. right? So a combination of designers, researchers, developers, and product managers, and TPM, depending on what they're working on. And so you don't have to actually manage people to lead. I think there's so many examples in technology where you can kind of see a leader based on kind of how they rally a team, how they kind of storytell, how they get people kind of motivated and understanding what they're actually working on. And so I look for people who kind of show that, whether or not they actually manage people. Like leadership and management, I think, are two very different things that often kind of get grouped together. Everyone leads. Like everyone can lead, and actually more and more, I think in tech, you're seeing a lot more like principal roles. People actually, in many cases, they want to lead, but they don't want to manage. And so I think having tracks for that kind of stuff is quite important too.
Leadership are people that are not afraid to come to the front of the room and sit in the open row of seats. So those in the back, there's an entire open row in the front here if you want to actually sit. So interesting question. What do I look for when I look at people to be future leaders of an organization, and certainly in my world? I think the most important thing for me is how you think. I've also always been of the opinion that I can teach you anything you need to know. We all go through school, university, whatever learning and stuff that we do through our career. So we can teach you anything you need to know. It's about how you think. And I find specifically queer people tend to think a little differently, tend to be more creative. We come from, each of us have our own story of how we came out. Some of us might not actually be out at work yet, but we go through a rough time in our lives where we actually do a lot of self-discovery. And when you get out of that empowerment that it gives you, that sense of self that it gives you, actually, you use the word superpower. I would absolutely say it's a superpower. I am better today because I'm out, and because I've gone through the struggle of going through that. It wasn't easy, but I'm better today because of that. So I look for people in terms of how they think, and it's all these sort of soft skills. It's interesting when you start getting into more senior levels of the organization, it becomes even more around how you actually fit into the organization. Um, and our organization specifically, we hire people and we promote people based on, can they actually, prove a point? Can they debate me? I don't want somebody to agree with me. I want somebody to disagree with me and tell me why. So we can have a debate, we can have a conversation, and it's about that creativity that's really ultimately important. You were absolutely right. There's a big difference between managing and leading. A lot of people think you have to be a manager in order to be a leader. Absolutely not. And you'll actually start finding there's less talk about managing and more talk about leading as organizations grow up and as we sort of learn how people think and how people operate. So yeah, I look for people that are themselves, that are creative, can think outside the box. I hate that term, but it's true. And I think we have in this community a lot of strength to bring to the table in that space.
Great, yeah. And you're both involved in ERGs, and curious what their focus is. How are they supporting the employees at the companies?
So I have the mic. I'll start and I'll give it to you. Otherwise, we're going to bounce the mic all the time. So yes, I'm the executive sponsor of the Platforms and Technology Forever Proud Committee, or the Employee Resource Group. Within the bank, we have an enterprise group, and then each one of the bank segments have their own, and we do a lot of work together, and we have a number of sort of enterprise strategic things that we work on. Within platforms and technology, we are actually sort of really taking a very sharp focus this year on a number of things. Firstly, and I'm not sure if it's the same everywhere, I think it probably is. When you look at the percentage of people that are out within technology, it is significantly lower in technology than it is in other parts of the bank, marketing, HR, etc. Even the branch network has more people that are out than technology. And the question we're sort of asking ourselves is that because we don't have an open, welcoming environment? I think to some extent it is. Or is that because people just don't select technology as a career? I think it's probably a little bit of both. So what we are going to be doing this year is really focus down on how do we make sure, other than what everything that TD does, supporting Pride and all the kind of things that we do on a day-to-day, every day, 365 days of the year, we really want to make sure that we are out present senior executive leaders all the way down, and not just there and making a speech and walking out, but actually present at events, so that we can show that all the way from the top of the organization that it's a welcoming, open environment. It's going to be a bit of hard pushing there. I think there are some areas certainly that people still have challenges with that. But we're going to be really aggressive around pushing that. So that's the first part, and really area that we're going to be focusing. And the second area is really around recruiting. We want to make sure that, if it is because it's not a welcome environment, we want to make sure it's a welcome environment. If it's because people are not selecting technology as a career, we want to make sure that people know that it is a career. So not just hiring into the bank, but actually working with organizations that put some of that value back into the communities to make the communities realize and pick STEM and technology as a career option. So we sort of feed the pump from the very start. Those are two of the broad areas that we're focusing on. There's a whole bunch of other stuff, but I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I think so. I love kind of leading what we call our pillar. I've been doing it for about a year and a half. Um, I feel like we've moved on from kind of the table stakes stuff that, sometimes it's a little scary to hear folks still talking about kind of climbing some of those hills that I feel like we should have already kind of scaled and moved on to the next. Things like, including pronouns in the technology that we use, just making space for different folks at the table. So I think for us, it's a little bit of education. So there are still, a lot of folks who just simply don't understand the experiences of queer people and kind of, what it takes to build an inclusive culture. But ultimately, what we're really trying to do, I think we've kind of spent a lot of time focused on our office, like on the offices, head offices, and as a retailer with over 2,000 locations across the country. I was saying to these guys on the call, we are like in many small towns, which Canada is pretty much a ton of small towns and like three big cities. But in many small towns, the grocery store is actually like the heart of the town. And those places have people from all walks of life coming through those doors literally every single day. And, I think Loblaw is a company of 200,000 employees. 170,000 of those are in our stores. And if we always say, like, if we can impact our stores and the colleagues who work within those stores, and that kind of transcends to the customers who are coming through those doors, and like, those like little kids coming in and seeing folks who look like themselves in those spaces because they can show up like themselves. Like, that's a pretty powerful thing. I'm kind of keeping it at, a pretty high level there, but I've gone into stores and kind of seen that in action. And so for us, it really is about, making sure that we can have a broader impact than just our offices. And I know, David, when I kind of mentioned that, you made a great comment too. Like, as a bank, yeah, there's branches kind of all around, and that's really where people are face to face with all Canadians and are all folks living in this country or coming through this country, and that's kind of where the impact can be. And so we're really trying to think about how can we make stores, which actually historically have been very male, like cis white male driven, um, straight driven, like just very non-diverse, and actually really start to bring that diversity into those spaces and that inclusivity. So like that's really that's where I think we can have the greatest impact. But in general, like, I loved also what you said around recruiting. Like, for me, getting more like being vocal at these types of events so we can kind of attract folks to kind of share our stories. And there's a lot of people who are not out at work. There's a lot of people who are working for employers who simply don't make that an easy experience. And I think that we all kind of need to either share how we do it in our spaces so they can do it in theirs, or kind of build partnerships, build allyships.
And yeah, thank you for making that call out to Yes. We were talking the other day on the call. It's either the grocery store in the town or it's the bank branch that people sort of get together. Everybody knows each other in one of those two. You need money to shop. And yes, we have, as a bank that spans the entire country, we have the exact same scenario. I was the scenario I was describing was, we have community events within the bank. We have networking events and speed mentoring and those sort of things. And I was sitting at one of those speed mentoring events talking to people, and there were 6 or 7 people, it's eight around the table, 7 other people around the table, of which probably 3 or 4 were from the branch network. So it's a significant representation. But the one individual was sort of there sitting, shaking, saying, "This event outed me in my branch." I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, the invitation came as, LGBTQ speed mentoring event. And I don't know if you know, but in the branches, we have a shared calendar. So all my colleagues in the branch could see this event and could see that I'm part of it. And that sort of made me realize, whoa, yes. And I think we have a little bit of a Toronto big city bias when we think about this stuff. You're not in the US. We have a significant footprint in the United States, including Florida, for example, where we really have to walk a very thin line between we are an open, diverse, proudly open, diverse organization, yet we operate in environments that are extremely restrictive. And it's a challenge for us as a in my group specifically. We have people all across the country, so we really need to think about that and sort of take the Toronto centric or the Montreal centric view and actually look at it from the small town and other places.
Great, yeah. Just prompt the crowd. Start thinking of questions that you might want to ask the panelists as well, because we're going to go into the second half in a few minutes. Also, just a theme from earlier sessions is visibility, and so thank you for being out and proud senior leader sharing for folks. Curious about moments in your career, periods in your career where things were challenging and how you got through that.
I've got the mic, so I'll start. Talking stick. I've got the talking stick. So I alluded to it a little bit earlier. Now, I am to some extent ashamed to say that for the significantly original part of my career, I was certainly not out. And as a white male that doesn't present as gay, I think it helped me in my earlier parts of my career, especially 20, 30 years ago, as I was sort of growing up into it. I came out in the workplace probably about 10 years ago, maybe a little bit more, because the organization I was in, one of the other banks, had a pride committee. And I saw people there, and we talked, and we got together, we had events, etc. And it just made me feel comfortable to be out at work. And you know, the connections I made, the network I built, etc., was amazing. And I think the key thing that I realized there was, and I remember I was standing in the back of the room. I was sort of like, I don't want people to see me, because I was quite anxious about it. Seeing senior executive vice president in the room talking, seeing senior executives talking, being out, being part, that made me feel comfortable to actually do that. I moved from there to another organization, also a bank. Unfortunately, the environment was the extreme opposite. And I felt actually forced to go back into the closet. I was out in one of the campuses out in Scarborough. And that's where I actually realized that downtown Toronto is not the same as Scarborough. And the environment, the people, the culture was such that I felt I had to go back in the closet. For 2 years, I was, I would say, partner instead of husband. And if people, you've all gone through that. Where's your wife? Well, no, my partner is at home. Do you have kids? No, I don't have kids yet. Just that kind of stuff. So, coming to TD again, ta-da, here I am. So I think that visibility is really important. And that's that visibility that actually made me sort of come out of my shell in the work environment. But yeah, it wasn't easy.
Thank you. I think there's probably two things for me. One is I actually don't have like this big like moment or this kind of like story that kind of sits in my head when I was just thinking through that, but it's actually like this, just like this like lifetime of like somewhat call it microaggression and unintentional kind of microaggressions through the years. And I think, queer people often say they have to come out every day at work. So every single day, someone says something or asks something where I'm put in like an awkward position. I actually don't feel awkward about it, but I feel like I'm making them feel awkward about it. So I remember we had a new HR lead at Loblaw Digital, and she said, "Oh, what does your husband do?" And it's like that moment where you're like, "Oh, it's my wife," and then she feels weird, and then I feel weird for making her feel weird, and it's like it's those constant things, right? That just kind of um, add to the already any other work or burden or responsibility or stress or excitement that you already are kind of managing, right? And so it's just an additional thing to carry with you through every single day. And then I think and that never ends. I think I don't I mean I'm not at the end of my career, but personally I feel like that's never going to end, unfortunately. And so it's really how you manage those things and how you take those as opportunities to kind of make people feel welcome to make mistakes so that more people make those mistakes and learn faster. Um, and then I think the second thing is like, yeah, I think we always say like diversity and inclusion, diversity and inclusion. And I think those two things, like they kind of, maybe they belong together, but often they don't, at least not for me. Like I feel very included. I report into our chairman and president, and, I'm not on the management board, but I walk into that room almost every day. And, even though I feel included and welcomed, it is not a diverse room. It's, it's kind of all white, straight guys actually right now. Um, our board is diverse. Our board of directors is our management board is not. And then every layer below is quite diverse. My leadership team at Loblaw Digital is very, very diverse and but I walk into that room, and even though I'm there, like, and I feel like I'm doing a great job and I'm very welcomed, um, I go home that day and I look at my wife, I'm like, ugh, it's just like a drain. It's just like an excitement drain, and that's not a diverse room. I feel included. It's not diverse. And so for me, it's like those moments of constantly feeling this sense of responsibility to change that. And I can't change it alone. And I'm also white. I'm not I'm not I find that if you were to throw someone like myself into that mix, that's somewhat violent. Like it's you do feel like I feel like I'd be the loudest, most kind of like the one trying to change everything, and then you're kind of excluded because you become that one kind of token person, And so I think feeling like the responsibility to change that kind of stuff, but also knowing that's such a huge thing to do. I think that's kind of what I'm still struggling with, and probably will continue, through my career, and especially as you kind of move higher up. That seems to be the case higher up in many organizations, whether or not that folks kind of rally around DE and I. I'm sure they're going to add a letter to it soon, right? There's got to be another letter. Yeah, that's kind of I think the experiences that I have, and I'm sure many folks in this room have, or maybe will have.
Yeah, I think there's an important lesson to pick up there is the expectation that people that are members of 2S LGBTQ plus communities are the ones to drive the change, or in earlier sessions they mentioned educate everyone on it, and one that can distract you from what you actually want to do in your career in tech. And two, as you mentioned, if they don't actually want that change to happen, you can be putting yourself in a position that you just end up excluded and maybe not.
Yeah, like I spend a lot of time thinking. I probably spend way more time stressing and thinking about that than they do, and and they're able to focus. Like even as a woman, getting ready. Like for they go we go off to an offsite, and for them, I know it's easy. I know it's easy because they wear the same thing all the time, and for me, I'm like stressing about what I'm like. It's just an extra distraction. It's just an additional thing we're thinking about. They're thinking less about it. Maybe they're thinking about it, but maybe probably not as much as the folks who are most impacted by those disadvantages.
Quick story. A few months ago, I think 2 months ago, we had a DNI offsite in New York. I was there virtually. where the top executive of a technology organization sort of really wanted to get deep on, how all the different diversity pillars that we have, and then, what bold actions can we take to really sort of drive the forward on the activities we need to do. When I presented on our pillar specifically, we had just, I think, a month or so before said the official acronym we're going to use is 2S LGBTQ plus. But I'm still sort of stuck in the one before that, which is LGBTQ2S plus. I heard an I earlier today. We Reverend Brett Hawks presented to us a couple of weeks ago. He just used LGBTQ. And as I was sort of presenting, I stumbled over the acronym probably 5 times in the thing. And the interesting thing that came from that is, the senior exec said to me, you know what, one thing he's really scared about is he going to say something wrong? Is he going to get, finger pointed at him for, forgetting the 2S? Well, actually, frankly, they didn't even know what 2S stood for, so we explained that. But, forgetting a letter or saying it wrong or misgendering somebody, and that's why he says that's why he pulls back. He doesn't want to engage because he's scared of offending somebody. And I said, and I think you'll all agree with me, is like, it's not about getting it right. It's about at least trying. And I think that's a key message to make that. You talked about the awkwardness. Everybody's awkward. It's not our job to educate everybody, but it's certainly our job to help people push through a little bit of that fear as well by being open and honest and welcoming of people at least trying.
Yeah, and making mistakes is fine, but I think when we bring it back to people skills, it's about how you build that relationship of trust and respect before those mistakes happen. If their only encounter with you is them making mistakes about their identity, that's one thing. But if you've already built that trust and respect, then that's easier to push through. Oh, I'm the moderator. All right. Well, uh, good morning again. Um, okay, so I'll switch gears a little bit and get into networking because we're in a group. So one, I'll start asking you questions or ask you to think about what goals you have for yourself. You're at the networking event. There's going to be lots of breaks here. But in terms of networking and career development and people skills, how has that helped you? What's kind of your approach or take on that?
So networking, very hard for me to do. I grew up in a country where everybody had huge walls surrounding their properties with razor wire across the top. We didn't know our neighbors, and we sort of it was the family, and everything was sort of in the family. So being in an environment, South Africans tend to be wallflowers. I don't know if you've noticed. Any other South Africans in the room? No. Okay, so they exactly they won't disagree with me, but culturally we grew up as being wallflowers, and I'm personally very uncomfortable with small talk. But I've learned to actually break through that because it's so important to connect with people. And yeah, sometimes you have to talk about the weather. I mean, don't ask me about sports. I don't know anything about sports, especially North American sport. But it's really important to network because, as was said earlier, your network is really what's going to carry you through the organization. It was that network at the one bank that really sort of opened me to the organization. It was the lack of that network at the other organization that made me close down again. And in the new world, it's the network here. So networking critically important for just well-being and mental health, but also the support network that you need, and sort of you have courage in numbers. And secondly, in terms of how you leverage that in your career, I think it's about visibility. The speed mentoring event I mentioned earlier, there were about 300 and so people in the room. No, 200 and something, 220, I forget the number. And when I walked in there, out of technology leaderships, there were 3 out of 300 technology leaders in that room. And to me, it's like, if we want people to understand technology is welcoming, we better represent. So it's that visibility that actually gives you the currency, if you will, to actually operate within the organization. Um, there's strength in being a statistic. We are, most of us, a statistic in the organizations that we're in. We mostly, on the good side of it, a statistic they want to increase. So I would say, use the fact that you're a statistic, use the fact that you're an important statistic for certainly companies in Canada. Now, don't be an idiot with it, but you can use it to grow your career in the organization by being visible, by being a leader, and actually being yourself.
Yeah, nice. Um, yeah, I mean, I think what makes a great leader is the ability to communicate effectively. And so there's no better way to kind of flex those communication skills like networking. I also am not a good networker. I'm at home watching Raptors games, actually, basketball games, big time basketball only. But I mean, it really is when I think about a lot of the folks who have joined Loblaw Digital, many have done so by, arriving in my LinkedIn inbox kind of thing. I know that there's a huge advantage to that. I've been in the same job for a really long time, so I haven't really kind of, maybe that's why I haven't networked as much. But it really is a huge lever to kind of land a great job. That's the truth, and especially when it's a community kind of event, that's such a huge opportunity to kind of find folks like yourself and actually get a good read on the reality of like the inside of the organization when it comes to inclusivity of queer people and opportunities for queer people. And I think every organization is going to tell you externally we support the 2S LGBTQI community. It's going to be up on their website, and they're going to have an ERG, and they're going to have folks, kind of those folks show up at events when it comes to kind of recruiting events and so on. But often the experiences inside can be very different. Certainly, that I've heard many stories of that nature. And so I think, getting an opportunity certainly here to kind of get a good read on what it truly is like inside different organizations is helpful. And yeah, I mean, like a big part of my role is constantly storytelling and selling people, whether that's selling, my boss on investing more in some of the ventures that we're looking to pursue, or getting our engineers to understand why we're asking them to build this thing that we're asking them to build. um, it is really all about communication and connecting people. And that's how you build a great culture, and that's how you get a good job, and that's how you find your people. And so, I think for me, I probably should now. And networking sounds great. Maybe I'm going to do more of it. But yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously huge benefits there. I think but it is about getting to the root of it, not talking about the weather necessarily. I mean, obviously it's a good. We talked about the weather when I saw you, so so I don't want to shit on the weather, but yeah, I think it is about finding those people who are welcoming, and kind of creating those spaces to have some meaningful discussions. Yeah.
Great. All right. We're just gonna take time if there's questions from the audience. Okay. Are you confined to yell, or do you want a mic?
Yep.
Will move up your career with the executives. Oftentimes I see is mostly lip service. Sorry if I'm being very blunt about it. It's when it comes to board of directors or senior leaders. It's like, yes, it's all about, create a DI office. And often since the last 2 years, it's a lot of emphasis on creating a DI office. But then actually, when if you're a queer person looking at the real tangible changes within the organization, still a long way to go, regardless whether it's TD, RDC, wherever you go. You see, so how do we make a difference? Like, how can we make a tangible difference, top down? So your point about, you walking into the room where it's all this white gendered man, board of directors. So how can you change that at that level? Are there any thought process? Are there like any wisdom that you can share, or anything that you're trying?
Um, I mean, I know we don't want this to be the case, but we're left doing the vast majority of the work. And so it just is, it's the responsibility we get by being who we are. You know, the one example I'll give is they recently promoted inside of our organization, they promoted, they replaced the only woman on that management board who is a gay woman with a straight white man. And I was on, and he had been in the organization forever. He'd kind of come out, he was in the stores, came all the way up, probably spent 30 years in that organization, crushing it. And everyone, you know, and when this happened, our chairman kind of came in and explained and spoke to the DEI council, and we discussed it. And everyone around the table in the DEI council was like, best person for the job, like can't argue it, best person for the job, best person for the job. And maybe that's the case, but you know, I was uncomfortable with that, and I raised my hand and gave a different point of view, which was they're the best person for the job because they've been given all the privileges and coaching and support their entire career to become the best person for the job. So of course they're going to be the best person for the job, in your opinion. And I feel like no one had ever kind of like challenged that room. And I took that opportunity. It was 30 people who, you know, are supposed to be the change makers, and they got to hear that. And I kind of went off a little bit, and I actually messaged people after to be like, sorry, I went off a little too much, but including my boss. But you know, that's just the responsibility. Like, I'm happy to kind of take, you know, do that. I feel confident enough in kind of my job, my role, and the security of my job, and how I'm valued in that organization. And I've forced enough conversations to know what my next role is, that I feel like I'm going to use that platform that I have to kind of get real with everybody in that room. And it's going to take a lot of those. And it didn't change the fact that they promoted that man into that role. But if you keep doing that, you start to see the change. It's not going to happen overnight, obviously. It's just a responsibility that I kind of feel I have. And, you know, I think we probably all feel that way. Whether it's like there's so many different facets of diversity, like, and you know, there's so much intersectionality involved too. But like, I don't know. I think that can happen in pockets. It doesn't have to happen with, you know, SVP and a management board. It can happen in all different pockets of teams, and it does. And I would say if you lead a team, you can kind of control that. That's your responsibility, and you can control that. If it's out of your control, then it's just about using your voice.
So I would say that fundamental culture change comes from both the top and from the bottom up. Rupert's in the room here. Is it 1995 that TD did the same-sex benefits? 94. So the first bank to introduce benefits for same-sex couples. Ed Clark, the CEO at the time, got a lot of pushback. You know, many organizations said, "That's it. I'm not banking with this bank anymore," et cetera, et cetera. And Ed's response was, "There are other banks they can go to." And it took that sort of top down. This is the stance I'm making, that this is important to us as an organization, that has, you know, driven the TD culture from that point forward and is still there today. I think sometimes we forget, you know, looking where we are today, we forget that it took a lot to get here. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, some of us probably wouldn't be sitting here. We would say, you know, sitting in a corner saying, I'm a straight man. So, you know, we need to celebrate the fact that we've accomplished a lot. We also have to acknowledge there's still a lot to do. The important thing, I think, is, it's been covered a few times here, is if you're not there, if you're not at the table, you cannot actually have a voice. So if you think about people like ourselves being in our organizations where it is now, for the most part, accepted to be who we are, I would say 99% of organizations, it's perfectly fine. Be there, be vocal, participate, grow through the organization, become the leaders of the future that are, you know, taking the baton from, you know, those of us that are there today, which we took from the people that were there before us, and continue to drive this. It's a long journey. We're not going to get to the end for many, many years, if ever, but we all have to participate in it.
Great. We have a question from the Bracewell up front. So
this is a jump off point from an example that you had told earlier about how from a fairly high level communication and an event that had happened. It had outed someone in a community that put this person in maybe an adverse situation. I wanted to ask a bit about that in terms of, this is maybe a thought, like, how do we strike that balance with a, I'll put global type of communication? I say that because that doesn't really exist. But how do we celebrate our communities inside of the companies while also protecting our localized team members who, you know, for an example like this, might actually still, it might be a necessity for them to still be in the closet or not out at work. How do we strike that balance, I guess? Because we want to obviously celebrate it on a wide scale, but we also need to protect some people.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you for that. I'll talk about how we struggle with this. We struggle with how do we actually identify people in the organization so we can reach out to them. And we don't have a distribution list called all the queer people in the bank for exactly that reason. Even though we want to send a message to all the queer people in the bank to say, hey, we got a party next door, why don't you join us? So for us, it's very much it's a self-serve model. We're saying this is everything that's available. These are all the events that are there. You choose if you want to participate or not. And then, so that particular example that I used, I think what we took away from that is maybe we shouldn't put it in the title of the meeting. Maybe we should call it just coaching event or career counseling or not speed dating. Speed coaching, whatever that might be, like call it something different so that it doesn't potentially out somebody. So I think that's the kind of stuff that we figure out. We're very, very cautious about it because, as I'm sure many of you here, or maybe not many, but you don't want to be outed when you're not ready for it. And we don't want to we don't want to do that to our people. So it's a bit of a, here are the services, you come use it if you want it. And we're not pushing stuff in that sense.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is that's how folks who are part of the queer community kind of can manage it. But that's because we know about those situations. We're fully aware that those have a lot of implications. What you have to watch out for is people who don't have a good understanding of that being the ones setting up these types of things, right? And so it really is about that fundamental stuff that the ERG group does, which is awareness building, like understanding, like truly getting kind of what these types of communities can potentially experience. And so it is kind of that's the important stuff I think that ERG groups are doing, is really just appreciation and understanding and comprehension of the potential risks in the work that you may be doing that you think is helping, but actually might be doing the opposite.
We say that taking a note from history to say that, like, okay, well, 10 years ago, we may have treated it this way. In terms of our subtlety, in certain communities, we still have to be there with our communication strategies.
I mean, and that's why like a hub and spoke model works really well in organizations, of having experts and then folks kind of embedded and kind of connected to that core to constantly be learning and growing, because there's a lot that, there's a lot happening.
Yeah.
And so I think it's not like, that's why I hate having like one person or one office that's responsible for it. I think having those folks everywhere and own responsibility, but a hub and spoke is really helpful for those types of experiences.
Thank you so much.
Great. I think we just have time for one more question, and then we're going to do closing, and then yes. So yeah.
The conversation was so interesting. David, you mentioned that in banking in particular, there's still, it's a huge institution. I work for the federal government, also a huge institution, traditional institutions to say the least. How do you kind of, as leaders, go about like making safe spaces for your employees, particularly if they're queer, as they go about like interacting with other groups within these large organizational ecosystems?
Quick answer to that because I want to get another question in if we can. Sorry, I'm taking over. Um, it's fundamental culture of the organization that we must and we will create safe spaces, and we do not tolerate it if there isn't. So within our organization, it's people say when you cut, we bleed green. We also bleed diversity and inclusion. So it's fundamentally who we are. I cannot speak for everybody else, but that's ultimately what it comes down to. And demonstrated, visible leadership saying it is important.
Okay, apparently there's a question over here.
Yes, I'm curious to know how you would suggest someone hone their people skills in remote work, like in a remote work situation, because connecting with your colleagues obviously is much harder. It's not going away anytime soon. So how's that impacted like your management style, but also like helping develop your team?
So this is going to be very controversial when I say this. I don't think you can hone your people skills in a virtual environment. You need to interact with people to do that. Actually, I'll speak for me personally. I've actually noticed people starting to lose their people skills because they're talking to a glass screen, not a human being. And therefore, bad behaviors are starting to show where, frankly, if you were in the room with a person, you wouldn't act like that. So I would say, we're in a virtual world now. We are in a hybrid world. Try to make, if it's all possible, those events, those we call it moments that matter, where you and your leadership and your team and everything get together and actually be humans together. And that's how you hone your people skills. I personally don't think you can do it in a purely virtual environment.
So funny because I feel the opposite. I feel like it doesn't change. I think you still need, the only trick I would say is I hide my camera because I find that in virtual world, I don't know if you're all very aware of your faces now, but you're looking at yourself instead of when you're talking, you're looking at yourself and you're not looking at the person. I catch myself doing it all the time when I'm on a different platform. I think it doesn't change. I think it's about really listening really closely and listening to listen, not to respond. I find that if you genuinely can understand, like you still get the vibe. Like I think if you can genuinely understand and you create a space where people can be really open with you, you're gonna get those inputs, and then it's about figuring out how you respond and how you kind of can figure out how to influence in that. I also think like observing other great leaders that you respect. Now you kind of have more access to that. Like I feel like we never had like a 45-person meeting when we were in the office, but like we have them all the time now, which is horrible, but it is what it is. And we have kind of like open door meetings. So if you want to join certain sessions to listen into certain parts, let's say as an engineer or designer, to understand the context of why we're doing what we're doing. And I think a really great trick that I always took, a lot of my leadership skills and my people skills come from kind of adopting what I liked in others. And like that approach, like I'm very approachable or accessible. I bring a lot of like humor to work. And that's kind of things that I adopted from leaders that I had in the past, women leaders in particular. And so I find a great way to kind of hone those people skills is look at who you respect that does that well. And that's a really, actually, I think virtual, remote makes that really easy. Like if I was in a meeting with you and you were just like jotting down notes of like what like I'd be like, what's he writing? I don't know what's going on. But I think that like you kind of have this like kind of like one-way screen to really kind of learn from other people. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm in the office every day. So, but I still spend the vast majority of my time on screens.
Prerequisite being on video.
Is the prerequisite being on video? For what? Prerequisite for what?
To actually being able to. So
To actually being able to actually read the other person, I think visual is important.
Yeah,
But
oh yeah, sorry. I'm assuming you meant on video, right?
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I honestly think a lot of it is the same. I love going in and connecting with people. As a leader, I kind of walk the floor. I used to do it far more because there's more people in the office, but I still walk the floor and I can sense where there's kind of frustration or kind of debate, and I'll go and join and help kind of work with the team to solve that, and or just even have an ear on the ground and then kind of go and change something on our leadership team side to change that. But I mean, I still think you can get a lot of that remotely. It really is just about paying attention, not being distracted. It's so easy to do when you're on a screen, you've got notifications, like turn that stuff off, turn off your screen, like just pay attention. And I think you'll still be able to achieve what you were able to when you were in person.
And just coming to mind too, like early career professionals, like the first couple of years of their career have been remote. So their first experiences with leadership has been remote. So for people who that's not their natural style, it's just something to consider for those junior folk.
Also, if you're in a role where you want to own your people skills and you're finding that you're not able to because of a virtual world, maybe you go to another role that has an in-person component for a few years. Like if that, like I spend different years in different roles owning different skills. So I'm speaking on as it's like I can't really relate, I guess. So I don't want to give advice of something that I haven't personally experienced, but I think it is you learn a lot from in different places, and I think movement, especially when you're in earlier stages of your career, is really important. And then I think when you kind of find that spot, then you stick. When you kind of feel stable and you feel like there's opportunity for growth, that's kind of where you stick. But until then, you kind of just like move around, right? Until you find what you love. Kind of like dating. Not move around too much. You get what I'm saying?
All right, so it's almost noon. I'll just offer a few minutes, I guess, to say final thoughts, and also thank you for sharing your stories and experiences and humor with the crowd.
Yeah, so I'll be quick because I think we're between you and lunch. Just one thing I will say, be visible. You are representing not just yourself, you're representing an entire movement, an entire community. And by being visible, you are creating a space like our keynote speaker said this morning, where people feel, oh, there's somebody else like me here. I can engage. That's how I got engaged. And frankly, that's in some cases where I walked out of the room because I couldn't see anybody I recognized. So be out there, use your employee resource groups, those that you have that, and be proud of the fact that you're actually a statistic, because you can use that to your advantage in your career.
Yeah, I mean, how do you top that? I agree. Yeah, I think just use this opportunity to like do great things and make it easier for the people who come next who will have similar, hopefully not the bad stuff, but the good stuff. I always kind of see this, like I said, as a superpower, and like somewhat of a responsibility. Although I didn't sign up for it, I think it's a really great like privilege, and like the skills that you kind of develop doing this kind of stuff actually transcends far more than being the gay person in the room fighting, the gay agenda. I think it has so many different, benefits to who you'll become as a person, as a leader, as a, an individual. So thank you for joining us. This was fun.